Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Pray for Zarifa, Supporting Women and Children in Afghanistan event. My name is Francesca Table, and I'm here today to discuss with my colleagues in mediation, international diplomacy, technologists, female empowerment leads, to discuss the current situation in Afghanistan, how the situation will deteriorate based on historical evidence, the effect on women and children, and what ways that we, the international community, can best support vulnerable women and children in Afghanistan during this time. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to others who are far more qualified than I am at discussing the topic, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from them.
As I said, as Francesca mentioned, I've been working in the conflict resolution, peace building area for about 20 years. And Hiroto, my husband, has been working in the humanitarian field for 3 decades. In our conversation, we'll give a bit of a historical outlook with the implications for today. And I will look at some guiding principles on how we can help the people, the Afghan people, in this situation of crisis. Okay, there we are.
Good morning and good evening, wherever you are. We are in London, and thank you for organizing this. And I'm very pleased and honored to participate in this gathering. My presentation title is "How They Got There." The Taliban and the mistakes of the West, how we brought them here. My experience in Afghanistan starts from 2001, just after the September 11. I was working with Japanese government those days, and we quickly organized the Afghan donors meeting in Tokyo, 2002. And then I visited Afghanistan and then worked in UN as well. First, I was involved in this reconstruction of peace building, with building schools for women, job for ex-combatants and things. And then I moved to UN doing this DDR, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of the ex-combatants. After the September 11, the coalitions led by the US bombed and eradicated Taliban and the Al-Qaeda. However, the peace building and the peace process was only done by this remaining so-called Northern Alliance, who were fighting with Taliban. There was a civil war there for a long time, and they're maintaining northern part of the country, especially with the Uzbek people, Uzbek, Tajik, and Hazara people are in the group. And after the September 11, Taliban, Al-Qaeda just went away, melted away, but they stayed because it's not really a group, I would say. It's a movement based on Pashtun. The majority of the population are Pashtun in Afghanistan, and also in the northern part of Pakistan. You can see in the map, and it's based on social culture deeply, and also religiously, the Islam. So even they were ousted from Kabul as a power, but they stayed in Pakistan, especially in the refugee camps. And they were very, very badly treated in the refugee camps. About up to 3 million were there, and still 1.5 million are there in Pakistan. So during this period, in Afghanistan, the Taliban kind of disappeared, but they still regrouped in Pakistan, and then they came back very quickly. So the peace process was within this Northern Alliance with the West, but they excluded the Taliban. But they were there, and they were very, very active in Pakistan as well. I'm sure everybody knows Malala Yousafzai. She was a victim of the Taliban movement in Pakistan. The Pakistani government had peace deals, but they never worked it out. And please give to another. Yes, this map. In the middle, there's an area called federally administrated tribal area. It's called FATA. And this area is in Pakistan. It is next connected to Afghanistan. And this place, Pakistan don't have the government, central government don't have access. Only the dots of cities and lines of roads, which is protected by the military. And later on, this is expanded to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which means Khyber side, there's a Khyber pass, which Alexander the Great passed, called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, means the Khyber side of the Pashtun. So it means that this area is belonging to Pashtun. So this is a hotbed, a breeding ground for the Taliban in its own, still. And so the West forgot in this peace process, reconstruction of Afghanistan to include Taliban from the beginning. And then they came back, and then it was too late, which is now. So what the West should do is to engage with Taliban. They should not be eradicated. They won't be eradicated. And then we should not abandon Afghanistan. And most of all, we should monitor what's going on the ground. We should not make the same mistakes we've done for so many times. It's not only the first time. We've done that after the Soviets retreat from Afghanistan, where there's all this problem started. So we should not repeat this. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will leave it to my wife, Francesca, for the next session.
Thank you, Hiroto. As I mentioned earlier, I will focus on some guiding principles on how we can help the Afghan people. For the purpose of simplification, I have divided the Afghans in two groups. Those who will be resettling elsewhere, who actually manage and will manage to come to a safer place, and those who have actually decided to stay home. So with regards to the first group, I think the most important aspect that we can draw on is to remember to keep the crisis alive in the eyes of the governments, in the eyes of the policymakers, and to do vital advocacy for the people who are trying to come and those who have actually arrived. Some things like question the numbers. 5,000 a year, said the British government. What happens to the other 15,000 who are eligible? Do they wait in queue? Are they going to go in hiding for 3 years before they can come? So all these things need to be upfront on the agenda, on the policymakers' agenda. We have a moral obligation to these people who want to leave the country. They've been involved in peace-building projects, nation-building projects, a military operation inspired by the West. There's no way out of this. This was driven by Western ideology. And we owe them the right, if they choose so, to resettle in a safer place for them and their families. The consequences of not doing this will be disgruntlement, grievances among wide sectors of the population, at home and elsewhere, and they can turn, as demonstrated by the attacks in the UK since 2011, it was about the violence in our own home soil. Now, one of the key and possibly most foremost principle is there is a huge Afghan diaspora already in many countries. Draw on the learning, on the experiences, on the skill that they bring, because they will be the ideal people to bridge the cultural differences, the cultural gaps. They will be the people who can relate to our governments, the needs, the actual needs of the Afghani people when they arrive here, not for the government to second guess what they might need and then provide a mismatch in terms of needs and what services we provide. There will be practical things that all of us can get involved in some way or another, using also technology, as Jane and Monique have explained earlier. But just to give you an example, the diplomas, the people from Afghanistan will need to translate their diplomas obtained in Afghanistan or in other parts of the world into the local system so that they can access the job market. This is something difficult and costly, and this is something that we can help them with. And then there will be all that psychosocial aspect, the Afghan people resettling into our countries will need. The trauma of leaving the country, the trauma of settling into a new context will all need to be addressed at different levels. And this is what can be done by using the local skills of the Afghani people, but also us as volunteers, as brokers between cultures. Now let me look at what we can do for the people who have decided to stay in Afghanistan or will not be able to move out. Now, first and foremost, the degree of what we will be able to do will depend on the Taliban policies. So that will be a constraint. But the number one guiding principle will be do no harm. Do not put at risk the people there. Our eagerness to help may translate in unintended consequences, which may lead to really unwanted exposures for these people to come and put highly at risk. So these are the two things we need to consider. The thing usually which is high on the agenda to help people is to build resilience among those who have stayed. And that will be, again, guided by the local population. And we can use the technology, like Monique and Jane have eloquently explained later, to help them. There will be need to build a parallel system to the one managed by the Taliban, because technology is fantastic, but it can be turned off with a switch if the government decides to do so. Just to give you an example, in Myanmar, the people at the borders all have double SIM cards, and they use the bordering country SIM card to communicate outside so that they can bypass the technology controlled by the government, by the central government. There will be capacity building that can be made available in many things, in technology uses, but also in dialogue development, in resilience, and most importantly, also building on what Hiroto said earlier, is dialogue initiatives. Really foster those multi-party dialogue initiatives, whether it's at a family level, neighborhood level, or at state level, which will need to include the Taliban and the bigger regional player, because they exert a lot of influence through the Taliban in this situation.
and thank you for pulling this together. And I think what you said earlier is the power of the internet enables us to meet and to talk and to share our ideas and to harness communities all around the world in support and in solidarity, not just for one woman of Afghanistan, but for all of the women of Afghanistan who are suffering at the moment and worried about their and their children's futures. So I'm really proud to be invited to be part of this. I'm incredibly humbled and I feel extremely inadequate, but I feel that the little piece I hope that I can contribute to the thinking is a piece that will get people just thinking a little bit more about other ways that we can help. Because I think for all of us, we feel helpless. We see what's going on, we're watching the footage, and we're sitting in countries all around the world and we feel like we can't do anything. So the nub of what I want to say is we can all do something. And I want to talk a little bit about how technology can help us do some of those things. But to start with, my background, among other things, is around women's and children's health. And I've written quite a lot about women's and children's health and technology in humanitarian settings. And of course, we have a humanitarian disaster on our hands here. So I want to talk a little bit about that and a little bit about some of the ways that we might be able to use technology to be able to take action ourselves from where we are, however small that is, because I think every single action that we take is powerful. It sends a message, and it can be moral support or material support or simply advocating so people can understand the suffering and what they can do.
Okay, I need to go now.
So we know that many Afghan women are already in horrendous circumstances, fleeing their homes, or sometimes worse, being locked in them. We know that women and children will bear the brunt and the risk of insecurity during this crisis. We know that the worst rates of preventable mortality and morbidity will be among women and children, with 60% of maternal deaths and 53% of under 5 deaths taking place in settings of conflict like this. And we know that they will be the most subject to health risk factors and chronic disease. We also know that conflict is the champion of poverty. And for many women who may not have fallen into poverty previously, the outcome of this is going to be that they will fall into poverty with all of those concomitant risks of being poor, injury, trauma, overcrowding, malnourishment, contamination, epidemic diseases, and lack of access to medical care. We also know that in conflict, some of the basic services that people may have had access to before, like water and electricity, sanitation, all of these collapse. Food becomes unattainable and rubble becomes a breeding ground for vermin. And we know that in these conditions, disease spreads and mortality starts to rise, and that women and children will bear the main brunt of this. And we know that women and girls will be targets for rape and sexual violence, and that the emotional scars and mental trauma of conflict can last a lifetime. And we know that many Afghan women will have no identity, so they will be unrecognisable before the law. They will be subject to trafficking, and they will have no access to services and no rights. And these are things that we need to think about how we can address. We know these things, but how can we act? And as I said before, I feel incredibly inadequate to make some suggestions in the face of such a humanitarian crisis and with people who have so much more experience with Afghanistan than me. But I want to make some suggestions about how technology can be an enabler for some of these people. I know it's not the sole answer, but it can help. So if we start actually with Afghanistan, 70% of the population do have access to mobile connections. There's 27 million mobile connections in Afghanistan, and there's 4.4 million social media users. And of the social media users, Twitter is 57% and Facebook is 39%. And social media can be a powerful tool, both for good and for bad. And we've seen how the Taliban actually has used social media as part of their political campaign. But we've also seen that the Taliban has been banned on Facebook, and at the same time they managed to post 17,000 tweets in 2 hours on Twitter. So one thing that we can do is put pressure on these platforms that are being used by the Taliban not to allow them to spread their messages of hate and subjugation. I believe that we should lobby the telcos where they exist to give free airtime to Afghan refugees, because what we saw in the European refugee crisis was that mobile phones were the lifeline for these refugees who were fleeing for their lives and travelling throughout Europe, where they could connect with friends and family and find out where safe places were. So we can lobby the telcos that operate in that area to give free airtime to Afghan refugees. We ourselves can use social media to be able to create awareness of what's going on and give people ideas about what they can do. We can advocate and put pressure on our government to accept Afghan refugees. Some young Gen Z Afghan in the US and around the world, they're already using TikTok and their social media platforms to raise attention of the plight of the people of Afghanistan. For those women who do have access to mobile phones and social media, it gives them a safe place to meet and to discuss and to share their stories. It also gives people an opportunity to share important news about blood donations or evacuation possibilities or major health issues that might be coming up, like cholera outbreaks and where to get help. We can use technology to donate. And one of the things that's interesting in places like Afghanistan, but not only Afghanistan, Venezuela and Lebanon and other places that are suffering severe crisis, people are actually turning to peer-to-peer transfers, digital assets and cryptocurrencies in several different ways, both to preserve the value of whatever assets they may have, to undertake peer-to-peer direct transactions so that they can send money directly, both locally and remittances either back into the country or to refugees who have mobile phones. And Afghanistan, actually, you might be interested to know, has catapulted from virtually nowhere on the chart to the top 20 holders of cryptocurrency in the world. So people are using it because it helps them to both protect the value of what they have and send and share it with other people. Some of the other things that we've seen, which any or all of us can get involved in, is that CARE has actually started a non-fungible token designed to support Afghan families. So people who are holders of crypto all around the world can buy these NFTs from CARE, and that can keep one Afghan family for a month, providing food, water and shelter. A crowdfunder you might have heard about to help Afghans evacuate raised over 6 million. There's a lot of opportunity to crowdfund for particular purposes to support Afghans who are fleeing or who have particular needs. And I was inspired to read that Code to Inspire, which has been teaching young Afghans to code, is continuing, and the young Afghans are continuing to code in their homes through donations that have been given via the Giving Block. So there are ways that we can make direct transfers to people in these settings and in the humanitarian camps. But I think the key for people in the humanitarian settings and for the people who are fleeing is mobile technology and access to mobile devices. So any way that we can put pressure on the suppliers, the providers, the telcos to be able to give that to the Afghans who are on the move, I think that that can be very powerful, because once they have that, they can receive knowledge, they can share information, they can receive remittances. So these seem very trivial ideas in the face of what people are experiencing in Afghanistan. And I thank you for giving me a few moments to share them. And I do feel, though, that each of us, however small, can do something. And I hope and I want to leave this event not just feeling virtuous because we've been through and we've talked about the challenges that are being faced in Afghanistan, but that we leave the event vowing to do something to show moral or material support, or to advocate for, or to create some sort of change that might, in a small way, help even one Afghan woman or girl.
You know, I'm also, one of the things that I'm involved in is in the humanized internet. I have a nonprofit that is really based on, you know, we look at blockchain and the whole notion of identity. Identity is very, very multimodal, as we understand. And on my nonprofit is a person who happened to be a Syrian refugee, right? So, you know, you have to kind of walk in the shoes of folks who have been involved. And I was also in Jordan and a UNHCR visit, and visited folks who have been in the camps for many years. And so I think that, you know, when we frame up this discussion specific to women and Afghanistan, I mean, there are so much that the technology is doing now, you know, especially in terms of digital identity and setting up what a digital identity means. We can absolutely start that discussion, because if you do not have a digital identity, and the system is just failing, Dr. Thomason knows that because we had an interaction together. The thesis is the system is failing. I mean, look at the registration, for gosh sakes, what's gone on in that involvement. And so they make it, if they can make it across the borders, if they can be, you know, they take with them a digital lockbox for them. The mobile phone is an extension of oneself. This is extremely important, especially for people who need that communications access. And so you can imagine the power of blockchain for good here in blockchain in terms of setting off what we mean by self-sovereign identity, and having this discussion where we can even think about a digital lockbox that is only purview to you. It just can go anywhere with you, right? And it's a hard problem to solve, by the way. It's a very hard problem to solve. But I think this is creating more opportunities. With crypto, there is, wow, you know, it's just really bolstering in terms of what we see in these particular economies. And here's the thing: we want to create the future we want to have together, not the one we want to avoid. And so, if we can think about you know, this notion of digital identity, this notion about credentialing, how we credential, we have this technology in place. If you do not have access to that, if you're not registered, by the way, and I'll just talk about what that means, because you have to look at which entity is doing that. Okay, what does that look like? Then you cannot get access to the basic fundamentals of water. You can't get access to food. You can't get access to education, to healthcare, and so on. And so we have, and I'm very honored. I want you to know I'm very honored to be a member, to participate in this discussion of how we can move forward for women and children of Afghanistan, who are the most vulnerable members of the population that we have to empower and take on further, you know, and help them to be able to at least be able to migrate, if we want to call it migration, or be able to resettle elsewhere, because they are very, very, very vulnerable. And I think that with self-sovereign identity, with these what I call a digital lockbox, and credentialing, I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I like, you know, when I talk with my colleagues who have had to walk those routes, it was easy to forge a passport. It was easy to forge a passport that is paper. It's very difficult to do something that is digital and that you carry with you. And I think that's the whole opportunity we can to not only to disintermediate what we see now in the context of Afghanistan, but actually create a better future globally. Thank you.
Other examples of help are accompaniment, some form of keeping the profile or key activists alive in the media, in the international media, to safeguard their safety if this is appropriate. Last but not least, there are contingency plans to be made, and they have to be made now, not when they're needed. Those people who have chosen to stay, potentially they might need to evacuate the country at the, like in a few hours. And we need those plans to be ready, in place, safe houses, networks to bring the people outside. So this is some ideas that we have thought of and we're sharing with you.
Of them had skills that could easily be deployed in other countries where they use migrant workers, and our system doesn't allow people, once they get into the UN system, they're kind of stuck in camps or in countries and they can't get out. And I think that that's a critical issue. I mean, the other issue, and this is a slightly bigger point than specifically around Afghans, but a lot of the money that is spent through the humanitarian system is in transfers of money. And much of this is still going through banks that have significant charges for simply moving the money. And there's potential to be able to put a lot more money into the system if we use lower cost corridors for moving that kind of money. And that's just a no-brainer to do something like that. Simply the point that I made earlier, which is about mobile technology allows people to connect with each other, to find places to go, to seek employment, to get knowledge and information. And one of the things that I'm really excited about now is the use of voice-activated technology. So that means that even illiterate people are able to have cheap devices that cost only US $10, and they're able to solve problems, do things, find information, and that's immensely powerful.
So if I can follow up, and it's always a pleasure to follow up with Dr. Thompson, who frames it up so wonderfully. Well, listen, the technology is here, full stop. So we have that technology. In fact, a credentialing organization could be a neutral organization, whether it's UNHCR, whatever that organization is. We'll just put it in quotes, TBD, to be decided. And you can use artificial intelligence to infer that you studied medicine or you studied communications, and then actually post a credential to the blockchain. The thing of it is, it becomes credentialed, right? It's immutable. The thing of it is that people want the receiving countries, the settlement countries, to actually honor that experience. Having spoken to people in the camps, they are more concerned about, well, gee, if I go to Sweden or if I go to Germany, if I go to the United States or wherever, will they honor that? Because that's the most important component of it. And that's where we have to work with the local companies. And by the way, would you hire me based on my experience in blockchain, right? Would you hire me based on that? This is the future of work discussion. So certainly we can do that today. Let's just start that conversation. Mm-hmm. Now, you actually posed a more interesting, Francesca, what are the dangers, right? And so by the way, my master's degree in blockchain and digital currency is credentialed on the blockchain. Even though I have a hard copy, I can reference it forever and ever more. So that's important to note. I like to walk the talk. I like to understand what I don't know. I don't know. But having said that, and I cannot emphasize more the use of the mobile phone, the extension, working with local communications providers, really important as part of the process here. But there is the counter discussion of it, especially if we talk about self-sovereign identity. And I think self-sovereign identity is a nice goal. It set contextually because it's about I selectively share what I want to share. I'm the center of this. The woman and the child can be in the center of this. discussion rather than the other way around, is that you could enable, if we're not careful, something, you know, that we've heard before is this sort of notion of surveillance capitalism. And there we have to be very, very careful. Who is surveilling whom? And how is that technology being misused? Because, you know, technology can be an enabler, but it also of good, but it actually can you know, it has no agency, but it actually can be used to abuse. And so there we have to be, you know, the purveyors and watchers of the system and how technology is.
Thank you. Just to give you an example from another context, and this will say everything. Sony had put up an application in Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka is an island where there are two main languages, Sinhala and Tamil. And the application was in English and Tamil because there is a huge Tamil-speaking population in India. So it was easy. The Sinhalese, i.e. the Sinhala speakers, became so abusive, and it was a reputational issue for Sony, and they were losing a lot of market in Sri Lanka because the app had not been translated in Sinhala. So this is a kind of a note of warning that we do need to understand the Afghan context. What language can things be expressed in that are comprehensible to everyone and not to leave anybody out? Culture is also very important because the people in Afghanistan and those who will come here will bring their own cultures, which may be quite alien, and will need cultural interpreters and dialogue to see that there is no harm in the way we express certain things, or they hear certain things and express certain things, but it's just part of the culture. So this is something that existing Afghan people in the diaspora and those people who have experience of working in those countries can work as mediators, like cultural mediators.
Because one of the things that's been used in healthcare, because often you're bringing healthcare workers from elsewhere in to look after displaced populations, is again using digital tools and video training and virtual reality and simulations to help train the health workers in how to be able to deal in culturally appropriate ways. I also wanted to say, and I think I'm probably going to embarrass her, but we actually have an Afghan young woman who was a refugee and who actually used to work for me here in Australia, Mursal Asami.
Thank you. So I migrated to Australia in 2003. And I've been doing my high school and university and masters. I've completed all of them here in Australia. I've moved with my immediate family members. So all of my extended family, like cousins, aunties, and uncles, they're all unfortunately back home. Majority of them are health professionals, so they're safe in a way. Some of them are in politics and in military, so they're not safe, and we're not too sure. We are worried for their future. My area of passion is international development, so that's where I have been working since I finished university and my master's, and that's where I met Jane Thomason. She's just an inspiring woman, so much to learn from. Yeah,